The year is 1374, and, for many reasons, it would go down in history as the Eventful year. The year begins in late January with Scythia's further expansion eastward. With the memory of Atahasi's war fresh in the minds of Scythian settlers, this campaign for land and glory takes on a certain genocidal character. Where once the Scythians ruled the Turk and assimilated the Greek, they sought to do much the same with those folk they found out on the taiga. However, with the especially gruesome nature of Atahasi's war, the Scythians sought revenge against every snow-dwelling tribe. This war recalled the betrayal of the Turks generations ago, and as such the two events became linked, bridging a gap of centuries with the essence of distrust and general hatred. The fear of the native Siberian tribes that they would be chased into the sea by Scythian power was unwittingly made a reality by Atahasi's rueful hand. As such, 1374 marked the beginning of a noted Siberian migratory period, with thousands of various people crowding into the lands of the coastal Kamchadals, Chukchi, and Kodint. Yet more made daring treks either through Scythian territory or by way of sea journey across the Sea of Okhotsk, both journeys with the destination of the Moshir Kor Khanate. Many of these tribes were somewhat related to the Ainu people by varying degrees, and considered them kin. The Moshir Kor Khanate was quite wild and relatively sparsely populated, which allowed many of these newcomers to land and settle with impunity. But those who actually ran the Khanate has little idea of what to do with them. Many of the more settled people, especially those who were still of unmixed Mongol stock, hated them and wanted them gone, even going to the lengths of killing them where they saw them. Many native Ainu saw them as interlopers in their ancestral lands which were promised to them by birthright, and to whom the Mongol yoke was already too much of an imposition. These people often got into large-scale blood feuds with them, spilling much Siberian blood. However, the group that currently held power and made up a large number of the fighting men, the mixed Ainu-Mongol minority, was willing to assimilate them as regional cousins whose cultures were certainly more compatible than the Ainu and the Mongol, especially considering how well even that had already turned out for them. The problem here is that the Siberians didn't necessarily want to be assimilated. Rather, they wanted to exist as distinct and wholly separate ethno-cultural identities within the Khanate itself, which put everybody involved in a complex and uncomfortable situation. The Siberians were unable to live anywhere else, as Siberia was being claimed and settled, and none of the other Mongol successor states would have let so many people, if any, cross the border alive in the first place. In March of 1374, we moved to the Middle East, where civil war rules the day. Parthia had been consumed by its civil war between the Turk military faction in the west, the Turco-Persian royal faction in the center, and the Persian Zoroastrian faction to the east, on the border with the Argonid Khanate. This civil war had been ravaging the empire for more than 40 years, and indeed it seemed as though Parthia operated in all ways like three separate kingdoms at this point. The empire's trade routes didn't function as intended, failing to penetrate any further west than the Zagros Mountains, and cities began to rot from disrepair and constant violence done to their walls and buildings. No cent could be spared for anything other than martial pursuits. Parthia burned a whole generation of youth and treasure on this war, and many simply foresaw these realms going their separate ways with enough time. However, in 1374, things finally seemed like they were beginning to change, and a winner was, perhaps, poised to take victory and deliver peace. By 1374, the Parthian Turco-Persian royal faction was being totally hemmed in and completely pressed on either side by the Turk military faction and the Zoroastrian separatists of Alborz Khan. Indeed, the most powerful of the three at this point was, in a true reversal of fortunes, Alborz Khan. As mentioned earlier, the trade routes failed to travel further west than the Zagros Mountains, but they still traveled just fine through the territory of these Persian Zoroastrian. As such, a lot more gold found its final home in the pockets of merchants who would donate to fire temples and the coffers of self-styled shahs that raised armies and pressed west in conquest. Indeed, the Battle of Basara was where the royal faction of the Parthian civil war met its end, with Zoroastrian armies overcoming the defenses of their capital city by way of redirecting river waters and denying the defenders any rest by way of constant noise through loud worship all hours of the night dedicated to Ahura Mazda, as coordinated in shifts to cover the whole day. As Basara fell, the rest of the royal faction fell with it, and the two remaining factions now began to quarrel directly. However, only 1 month past the Battle of Basara, a new third actor would force themselves onto the scene, this being the Mongolian Sunni Muslims of the Argonid Khanate. Long had they sought to conquer westward, seeing the holy cities of Mecca and Medina in the hands of heretic Shiites and heathen fire worshippers. However, the perfect time to strike revealed itself only now, as dual conditions had been duly met. The weakness of the Parthians had intersected with the recovered strength of the Argonids to make such an invasion basically inevitable. Even mighty Alborz couldn't hold back the tide, given that, while they had become mighty, they were still in the midst of a 40-year civil conflict that made defense against exterior threats essentially impossible. Thus, the Argonids conquered much of Afghanistan and the eastern half of the Persian Basin, and showed no signs of stopping. Indeed, the survival strategy of Alborz was less that of defending in a two-front war, and more about focusing almost exclusively on the western front in order to conquer their way westward until this two-front disaster became a manageable one-front fight yet again. It was a gamble, and certainly one that the Turks were not expecting, considering they were initially driven almost completely west of the Nile without a significant amount of pushback. Still, it was unclear if the gambit of Alborz would be enough to save the Parthian Empire, or even their prospective version of a Neo-Persian Empire, from total and utter destruction at the hands of a fanatical foreign foe. Finally, to the north, a series of satanic revolts took place across the kingdoms of Pieria-Halesia and southern Gothonia, spurred by popular Pierian discontent with their mass disenfranchisement in society, but without the numbers or indeed any other legal recourse to address the sidelining of their people and their religion. Pieria-Halesia didn't feel like a kingdom of composite identities, but instead felt more like a machine that took power and wealth from Pierians and gave that power and wealth to Halesians. As such, the satanic riots of 1374 saw churches burned, Christians sacrificed in the streets, and holy relics destroyed. This proved that there were still enough Satanists willing to fight and die for that kingdom they once knew, but even so, due to the social engineering on the part of the church, this angry mob was still a minority, even if they got every individual among their ranks out on the streets and ready to kill and die for what they believed. Not one drop of it would quite be enough to undo the hegemony of their occupiers. As such, the satanic riots acted as revenge for that which had been taken from them, seeking to cause as much damage as possible in as short an amount of time as possible. The armies of the Storm Cross sought to respond to the situation, especially with the urban-focused Order of Western Lightning. For the rest of the year, the Order would spend it clearing out rioters and preempting any new ones after profiling suspicious individuals. This proved that Satanists still existed on a large enough scale to resist, but perhaps not through the operations of a distinct body. On top of that, unusually cold weather, famines, and a new wave of bizarre medicine practices colored the day, harkening back to the grim days of the Plague Wars. Indeed, several outbreaks of known plagues and new, unknown diseases cropped up across the known world as the year revealed itself to be persistently and unusually chilly. Some believed it was a spurring by God to conquer the north, others thought it was some punishment for sin, but the people on the Anglian-held Isle of Iceland understood, if only obliquely, that the devastating volcanic eruption in their land that had killed thousands of men and beasts and hurled black smoke into the sky for days must have been involved somehow. As for the plagues, many were true sicknesses, due to the sun giving forth only pale light, with even the dreaded blind man's rot making a reappearance, even if it would not consume the entire continent this time, as it once had. There were others, however, which were variably called the fear sickness. The fear sickness never manifested any physical symptoms, and was defined by some bizarre behavior or other. On one particular occasion, an entire town danced themselves to death. Another town refused to drink until they were forced to. Another instance saw a convent fall to a plague of nuns who believed they could speak the language of the angels and spoke this bizarre tongue to the exclusion of their native ones. It was recognized then that these diseases were not normal diseases, and the Church treated them as spiritual afflictions, with the Inquisition roving from place to place in an attempt to root out supernatural causes and even to facilitate the treatment of those afflicted patients. Overall, the year of 1374 really earned its title of one of the busiest and most eventful, kick-starting events that would come to define the known world for centuries to come.